Now, about the first person who actually began to write about the Prophet ﷺ as a seerah is actually a book called Siratu Rasulillah sallallahu alaihi wasallam by Abu Bakr Muhammad ibn Ishaq. Abu Bakr Muhammad ibn Ishaq. And he dies in 151. He was from Iraq. He's a Baghdadi. He died in Baghdad. He's buried in Baghdad. He is the first person that actually writes a seerah. And you can see how early that is in terms of, because it's important to remember 151 seems like a lot of time because it's actually about 120 years after the Prophet ﷺ's death, right? From the point of his bi'tha until that. It's about 130 years. Now that can seem like a reasonably long time. The reality of it is it's not, and the reason for that is Islamic tradition was by and large oral for the first 100 years. In other words, there was very little actual documentation. Ulama were writing down things. Abu Huraira was writing down hadith. The Quran was being written down, but that is not the way it was being taught. And to give you an example, in Mauritania, people memorized the entire Quran without ever looking at a mushaf. Ever. And that's the way they memorize it, to this day. And we were there just recently, and Sheikh Khatri was teaching a child, the Quran, and he recites it, and the child writes it down on the lawh. And so there was somebody there, an Englishman, who just said, SubhanAllah, you don't ever look at a mushaf? And he said, Abadan. He said, most people here don't even have masahif. You know, the people that memorize the Quran in Mauritania in the desert, they literally don't even have a mushaf. And I once, there was a man there that I spent some time with who literally, he just recites Quran all day long and a good part of the night. That's just what he does, all the time. And I asked him if he ever looked at the mushaf, and he said, a few times. Even though it's actually better to read the Quran from the mushaf by Sharia. It's actually more virtuous to read it from the mushaf than it is to read it from memory. Unless you're doing qiyam al-layl. But normally, because they're considered the eye and the hand, share in the ibadah. But the point being is that the Quran is still transmitted, and it's one of the ways of talqeen, which is called talqeen shafawi, which is the oral transmission of the Quran. And that's the way it's been transmitted for 1400 years without any mistakes. So for the first 100 years, this is the way seerah was being transmitted, and this is the way hadiths were being transmitted. The sheikh would literally sit and he would tell the story from memory. And if you've been around people that have phenomenal memories, you'll appreciate this. If you haven't, it's a little difficult to relate to that. But I have actually met people that memorize entire books by heart, several books, not just one. And I actually met a man who memorized the entire Qamus and Muhit of Fairuz Abadi, which is about probably about 4,000 or 5,000 pages, small print, and he just memorized it by heart. You know, his name was Da'dud. He's a famous scholar in Mauritania. So he can just, you know, you say a word, and he'll, you know, give you the direct quote from that. And one of the sheikhs, Muhammad al-Khadir, I think it's Muhammad al-Khadir, went to. He was asked by the Basha of Egypt to go to Turkey and to get, because the best copy of the Qamus was in Turkey, and to go and transcribe it for him and do muqabala of it and everything. So after a few months he came back and he said, where's the book? And he said, bring some scribes. And so he brought the scribes and he just dictated the book by heart. He'd just gone there, memorized it, and came back. And another story, Muhammad Salim, I think, who was another Mauritanian, was once in Mali, and two Bambara people started arguing in front of him, and one killed the other. And when the police came, they asked what happened, and he said, I don't know, but bring somebody that knows their language. And so they brought somebody, and he said, and then he just quoted it. He didn't know what it meant. And then he said, and then he said, and he quoted it, he didn't know what it meant, and went back and forth until the man determined what actually had happened. And that's a true story. It's not like a made-up story. So there are people in our tradition, and not just Muslims, I mean non-Muslims, there have been non-Muslims that have these type memories where they can literally just memorize everything that they hear. And I know that there's a woman in Sadika whose husband was Mohammad Ahid, I think, who died not that long ago. And Mohammad Ahid said that he never heard anything or read anything except that he remembered it, ever. And so there's people that Allah gives that gift to. The early community had that. And so what that meant is that they did not need, they were actually, the person was more reliable than the book. That's what's extraordinary if you think about that. The person was more reliable than the book. And what the ulama said is that the knowledge in the Salaf was in their breast. In other words, wherever they went, it was with them. And Imam Shafi'i says, my knowledge is in my breast, it's not in a chest back at home. So if I go to the marketplace, it's with me. And if I go to the masjid, it's with me. Wherever I go, my knowledge is with me. It's not like a chest of books. And also Imam al-Ghazali, radiallahu anhu, he had spent 2 years transcribing his several books from a library in Samarkand. And on his way back, some brigands robbed their caravan. And they were taking all these books that he just spent 2 years writing down. And he said to the chief of the brigands, please just don't take my knowledge. It's of no benefit to you. And the brigand laughed. And he said, what kind of knowledge is it that the likes of me can steal it from you? And he said, Imam al-Ghazali said, he realized that Allah had made him say that to him to let him know that if you didn't memorize it, it wasn't, it was something you could lose any time. And he said after that, he memorized everything that he studied. So this was how the early community was. So they said that in the beginning, their knowledge was in the breast, and they transmitted it to people that way. And then they said, but later it went from the breast to the books. But the ulama became the keys through which the books could be unlocked for the students. In other words, now knowledge is in the books. It's no longer carried around by people. But the person who studies the books with a sheikh, the sheikh acts as a key to understanding the meanings so that they don't make mistakes. And that's what happens. So 151 is actually an early period to have actually the seerah written down. And Ibn Ishaq is still considered the foundational seerah of all seerah literature. And then the next person is Imam Muhammad bin Umar al-Waqidi, who died in 207. And Imam al-Waqidi is also somebody who wrote seerah. His seerah is not as strong as Ibn Ishaq's in terms of his sources, and it's an important seerah because of it's a very early seerah, but there's less reliability in it than in Ibn Ishaq. And then probably the most famous of all the seerah literature is a 3-volume work that was done by Abu Muhammad Abdul Malik ibn Hisham. And he died in 219. And Ibn Hisham, some actually consider his seerah really a tahdhib of Ibn Ishaq. In other words, he took Ibn Ishaq and he really separated the fat from the skinny, like the Arabs say. He took out what was good, what was bad, and he maintained what was good. And his seerah is really probably the most famous now. It's the foundational one that is studied traditionally in the madrasa systems and by the ulama. There have been since these men, but these are really the foundational seerah writers, these 3 men. Since then, there have been many, many seerahs. The Seerah al-Halabiyah is a famous one. Rawd al-Anf, which is another famous one from an Andalusian scholar. Qad Iyad, the Shifa. And then some mukhtasarat. Nur al-Yaqeen is a nice mukhtasar by, I think, Al-Khadir al-Baik or something. He was an Egyptian scholar. And it's also gone even into Persian. Payambar is a Persian Sirah. It's in Persian, isn't it, Payambar? Is a Persian Sirah literature. Urdu has a lot of Sirah literature. So you'll find in all the languages of Islam, and now including English, which has become a language of the Muslims, you'll find Sirah literature. And this is part of the fulfillment of Allah's word when He says, وَرَفَعْنَا لَكَ ذِكْرَكَ, we have elevated your remembrance. The fact that the Prophet ﷺ is remembered in all these written languages. His Sirah is in all the languages that people speak with and write with. And that's part of and he's also praised, and stories are told in many non-written languages. If you go to the tribal languages in Africa, that some are not written, they have storytellers that tell the stories of the Prophet ﷺ to this day. So this is part of a fulfillment that the Prophet is Muhammad, right? He is the one who's praised. And the Sirah is really praising the Prophet ﷺ, and it's a proof of his name. And some of the ulama said if there was no other mu'jiza than the name of the Prophet ﷺ, that would be enough for people to recognize the truth of his message. The fact that he was called the praised one. And that is what human beings have been doing. And interestingly enough, even the fair-minded non-Muslims, if they study his life, and this is the truth, the fair-minded non-Muslims, you look at people like Michener, you look at people like Bernard Shaw, Thomas Carlyle, you look at fair-minded non-Muslims who just look at his life, even Gandhi, right, the Indian who studied the life. And Gandhi was extremely impressed with Umar ibn al-Khattab. When fair-minded non-Muslims look at these people, they have to say, this was a praiseworthy man. He is somebody who was noble, and there are many examples of that. So, and even his enemies at the time in his life, the mushrikun, they really didn't have anything bad to say about him. That's the truth. They couldn't. And Abu Lahab even said, Wallahi, he's not a liar. We know he's not a liar. He's never told a lie to us. So even his enemies have to praise him if they're fair. And that's why the Arabs say, عَدُوٌ عَاقِلْ لَا صَدِيقٌ جَاهِلٌ. Give me an intelligent enemy and not an ignorant friend. Because the intelligent enemy, he'll be fair, and you can deal with him. Whereas the ignorant friend, they say, يَضُرُّكَ مِنْ حَيْثُ يُرِيدُ إِفَادَتَكَ. He harms you, but he wants to help you. So I think that's a really interesting and important aspect. And then its name, the name of this science is called Sirah, or Ilm al-Siyar. Sirah. It has a ta at the end, Sirah. And then it's also called, there's a branch of it called Maghazi. It's also called Al-Waqaya. Ilm al-Waqaya. It's called Ash-Shama'il, if it relates to his outward or his inward character, which is why he calls it Shama'il, Imam Tirmidhi. So it has these different names. These are all names that it's given. Sirah, and the plural is Siyar. Sirah comes from a word, Sara Yasiru, which means to go. And Sirah is a hay'ah. It's ismu hay'ah. It's the way you go. Literally. I mean, if you take a literal meaning, it means the way a person goes. His hay'ah. Right? Fi'la in Arabic is called ism hay'ah. That pattern. Sirah is ism hay'ah. It means the way in which somebody goes. Sara yasiru sayran. If you say siratan, siratuhu is the way his sayr is, the way his going is. So it describes the states of the Prophet, his behavior in giving, in taking, in speaking, in acting, how he looked, what his hay'ah, his physical hay'ah was, the fact that when he walked, anybody who walked with him, he appeared taller than that person, even if that person was known to be tall. And even though the Prophet ﷺ was considered to be of middle stature, he was neither extremely tall nor short. He was of middle stature. Despite that, whenever he walked with somebody, he appeared taller to them if they were known to be tall, which is an indication that's part of his sirah or his hay'ah, his way of being. And that's what sirah means. It's talking about the way in which the Prophet ﷺ is to be understood outwardly and inwardly. Right? And also the sirah of his life, the way in which his life manifested or unfolded to us. That's the meaning of sirah. So that it's important. The name really tells a lot about the actual subject. Now, in terms of the maghazi, maghazi is from a root word ghaza yaghzu, which literally means to intend something. Qasada, talabahu. It means to intend something, or ikhtaza. So if I say ghazawtul fawza, I intended to succeed. And it comes to mean, one of the derived meanings is to fight somebody, right? So, and the intention in fighting somebody is to conquer them and also to achieve some goal, usually, right? War is politics by other means, like Clausewitz says, right? In other words, politics, the whole point of politics is to achieve certain ends. And if those ends aren't achieved through the means of politics, then war becomes an extension of the political means, right? So it's really a branch of politics. The point of this is that the war is a means to achieve something. It's not an end in itself, unless somebody's insane, right? A madman makes war an end in itself. For human beings, it's a means. It's either a means for justice, establishing justice, or it's a means for perpetrating injustices. I mean, quite literally. It's one or the other. Ibn Farhun, radiallahu anhu, in the Tabsira, a great Maliki mujtahid, said that siyasa is of two types in Islam. In other words, Islam views siyasa as two things. He said siyasa is a means whereby justice is achieved in a society, which includes war. Or it's a means whereby oppression and injustice is achieved. It's one or the other. If it's siyasa shar'iyya, then it obviously is a means to achieve a just society, which is part of the point of the sharia. If it's siyasa kufriya, right, then it's a means whereby oppression is achieved. So the maghazi of the Prophet ﷺ, they're called the maghza. Like the Arabs say, what's the maghza? You know, ma huwa maghza hadha al-kalam. What's the intention behind this speech? So the maghza or the maghazi are the intentions of the Prophet in defeating the kuffar who were becoming barriers to achieving an end, which is the establishment of Islam. And that's the only reason why Muslims fight. Muslims fight to break down barriers. Right? They fight to achieve that end. And that's why the maghazi are called the maghazi. All right? And we'll go into the difference between ghazwa and the sarai. And there's different words that are used, which we'll go into when we get into Ling's book. And then the other definition of the is the shama'il. And the shama'il is shama'il are those qualities that characterize the mahasin of a person. In other words, shama'il particularly relate to good qualities, even though the original root word of shamal means taba, nature, the nature of a person. But the shama'il of a person are those qualities that are considered to be the good qualities of that person, right? So it's used as a technical term of our ulama to mean the mahasin of the Prophet ﷺ, zahira wa batina, his inward and his outward mahasin. So it would include his description, because one of the miracles of the Prophet ﷺ is he was the most beautiful human being that ever lived. I mean, he actually physically was a stunning person to look at. Physically, he was beautiful. He's more beautiful than Yusuf alayhi salam. And the ulama say that it's only the veils that, that Allah put on the Prophet that people didn't cut their knives when they looked at him. In other words, his light was so intense that people had to be limited in how much they could actually see of him, or else they would just they wouldn't be able to contain themselves. So so those are the names that are used, and then the istimdad, which is the sources, right? The istimdad of this science. Istimdadahu, the sources are those akhbar or athar and ahadith, narrations, traditions that relate to the subject matter itself, preferably like Imam Hafiz al-Iraqi, the famous muhaddith from Iraq, said they should really be sound. It's better to transmit sound, but the other ulama preferred to take, because all of it was good. Now you do find some things that are absolutely incorrect. For instance, the Salman Rushdie. Salman Rushdie took a story that's found in Imam Tabari's book. One of the things about our scholars, and this is the difference between, according to Ibn Taymiyyah, rahimahullah, between the people of bid'ah and the people of sunnah. Ibn Taymiyyah said that the people of bid'ah will only take what suits them. Whereas the people of sunnah, they transmit what goes against them and what is for them, because they want the rida of Allah. They don't want just a partisan, position that supports them, right? So what will happen in the literature, and another person, Fatima Mernissi, I don't like to mention names, but it's important to warn people about certain people. I mean, that's part of nasiha. Fatima Mernissi is somebody who also does that. She goes into the book. Some people say she doesn't do it. I mean, I know some Moroccan scholars that actually don't think she's capable of doing it. And she actually has people that research for her. But her books have been published, interesting enough, by Berkeley, right? So, I mean, why is it? It's amazing if a Muslim woman in the Arab world wants to make a lot of money right now, unfortunately. I mean, I shouldn't even be saying this, give people bad ideas. But all she has to do is attack Islam and tell horrible stories about her childhood, whether true or false, and write a book about it, whether she can write or not, like that Bangladeshi writer who can't even write. And that was one of the unfortunate. I mean, Salman Rushdie is a writer. He's he's won the Booker Award, and I mean, he is a capable writer. Whereas that woman, Nusrat or whatever her name was, she couldn't even write, and they realized it when they translated her books. They were disasters, right? But all you have to do is speak against Islam as a woman now, and you can get a publishing contract right away. And you just go down to University of Berkeley. And I'm interested in writing about the patriarchal tyrannies of Islamic tradition, and they'll sign you up right away. You don't have to have any degrees or anything, just that you're a Muslim that was born in a Muslim household or something like that. So the point being is that what Rushdie did, he studied Islamic history at Cambridge. It's an Orientalist hotbed of Orientalism. And one of the things that was obviously introduced to him was the history of Imam Tabari, which is in English. And in there it mentions about these verses in which, according to the tradition, the Prophet ﷺ actually gave concession to the mushrikeen in Mecca by recognizing Lat wa Uzza wa Manat. And then later, according to the tradition, said that Shaitan had actually tricked him and that it wasn't the case. And so those ayahs were removed from the Quran. Our ulama, Qadi Abu Bakr, Ibn al-Arabi says it's a completely fabricated narration and has no foundation. But there's an example where something got into the seerah literature and now has been used by the enemies of Islam, whereas traditionally it was left in the books because Imam Tabari was an imam and he did record it, and the fact that he recorded it is noteworthy in and of itself. So that's just an example of what can happen with seerah literature. So The other thing is it's also related to the Quran and the Hadith, because Badr is extensively mentioned in the Quran, Uhud is extensively mentioned in the Quran, things about the Prophet ﷺ, events that take place are in the Quran and need clarification through the seerah. For instance, the Zainab, when the Prophet married Zainab and the people came and ate, and everybody left except for 3, and the Prophet ﷺ wanted them to leave because it was his wedding night, but he was too, out of his generosity, he didn't tell them, please leave. He stayed with them, and then he left, and Zainab sat with him. It was before the separation. And then he came back, and they were still there. And so the ayahs came down telling people, if you eat with the Prophet, then when you finish eating, just leave. So that's an example where, verses in the Quran are explained through the seerah literature. And there are many, many other examples of that. And that's related to asbab al-nuzul, the reasons why things are revealed. And obviously the sunnah is a strong part of the seerah's sources, and the akhbar of the salaf, the early community. In terms of its hukam, Shaykh Ibn Hamdun radiallahu anhu says, the hukam really, zahirahu an-nadab, although one could say it's a fard kifaya in terms of maintaining an understanding of the Prophet. Really it's mandub to study the seerah for us as common Muslims. And the nadab comes from the fact that whoever studies the seerah literature will come to understand more fully Allah's word, وَإِنَّكَ لَعَلَى خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ. You are on a vast self-form, you're on a vast ethos, you're on a vast ethical nature. That the more you study the seerah of the Prophet, the more you realize that. And also because it is an obligation to love the Prophet ﷺ by Sharia. It is called shartu sihha lil iman. In other words, your iman is actually not sound if you don't love the Prophet ﷺ. It is a condition of iman that you love the Prophet ﷺ. And from that point of view, you could even say that there's a fard there, because if you don't know somebody, it's hard to really love them. You have to come, it's a famous line in this culture, I love you, and they say, you don't even know me, right? How can you love me, right? In other words, you really don't love a person until you come to know them, and then you can say fully, you could really tell them, I love you, because it's based on knowledge. And so loving the Prophet is based on knowing him, and knowing him is based on studying his seerah. It is also a shart, so it's a shart, everybody knows shart is a condition. It's a condition of the soundness of iman to love the Prophet. It's a condition of the perfection of iman to love the Prophet more than anybody, including your own self. So your iman is not complete until the Prophet ﷺ is more beloved to you than everything in creation, with the exception of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? In other words, you actually love the Prophet more than your own self. And the famous story in which the Sayyidina Umar said, Ya Rasulullah, inni uhibbuka akthara min kulli shay'in ma siwa nafsi allati bayna jambayya. I love you more than everything other than my own self, between my two sides. And the Prophet ﷺ said, Ya Umar, لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يحبني أكثر من والديه ومن بنيه ومن ماله ومن نفسه التي بين جنبيه. None of you loves me truly until he loves me more than his parents, than his wealth, than his children, and even his own self between his two sides. O kama qala sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And Omar immediately said, Ya Rasulullah, I love you more than my nafs, even that's between my two sides. And the Prophet ﷺ said, Al-ana ya Omar. Now your iman is complete. So that's important in really coming to love the Prophet ﷺ, is recognizing that our iman is not complete until we love the Prophet.